Hello, YouTube. This is Zach Easy. You can just call me Zach. For a long time, I've been wanting to start up a series where I make my way through every deck, archetype, win condition, whatever. Anyway, I've been thinking about a series where I work my way through every deck in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Try to make a build as competitive as I can make it for the current format and take it to locals and see how it does. There are some limitations. I can't afford some of the more powerful cards like Lightning Storm, Droplet, cards that are kind of staples in the format. But considering the fact that I'm only going to be going to locals, I don't think it matters too much. The metagame is going to be pretty much the same as what I can afford. There's maybe a couple people playing meta, which is good because I do want to pit these decks against real, like, modern decks, not just a bunch of people playing whatever pile of garbage they can get their hands on. But having mostly people with low-powered decks is going to make it where gameplay is at least interesting. I'm not just getting blown out by meta decks every round. That being said, I figured for the first episode of this series, and since, all the cards for it have been reprinted now, I figured I'd start with my favorite deck. Where is he? Hero. Specifically Omni Hero. I may try out more pure builds of Hero later on. Things that focus more on the elemental hero fusions with something like Infernal Devicer, or something that focuses more on evil heroes. Or I've also considered maybe like Vision Heroes in the future. Vision Heroes kind of are terrible, but they have a few cards and a few interactions that make them a little bit more interesting than some other decks. I may work my way through, maybe try and splash a few decks together. I do have other decks currently in the works. I'm working on a Baronless Pendulum Magician, which is very bricky. I have a VW Virtual World build that I took to locals a couple weeks ago. The locals I went to for that one was a little less competitive. I ended up only losing once, and it was to Galaxy of all things. And I lost entirely to my own misplays, not scooping soon enough game 2, and not realizing that I still had a battle phase game 3. But for the most part, I want to do this kind of with multiple goals in mind. The first goal is to create a space where any deck is up for contention. Any deck that anyone can think of. I'm not picky. I want to make my way through all of them. Who would have thought some decks would end up becoming meta again? Who would have thought we'd be seeing frogs in the year of our Lord 2022, right? Who would have thought that a card like King of the Swamp would be a $16 common? As new decks and new cards get printed in this game, tons of decks can suddenly go from being the worst deck you've ever seen to a tier 1 meta threat, basically overnight. Who would have thought that vanilla Thunder Dragon would be winning a YCS, right? That being said, there are limitations. I'm not just going to play a pile of random flip monsters and call it flip control or whatever. There has to be a game plan, there has to be a win condition, and it has to be at least somewhat consistent at achieving its goal. Um, that being said, I am willing to play literal garbage on occasion. One of the decks I'm really eyeing that I want to try and build at some point is Metaphys. I don't know why that one just seems bad enough that it will be interesting, but with enough of a game plan that I think it would be worth trying it out at least once. Um, on top of having Pendulum Magician mostly built, I also have most of the stuff for Dragon Link, for Eldritch, for Witchcrafter, for Plunder Patrol. The only thing holding me back from playing some of these decks is that most of them are played with auxiliary engines, specifically the Adventure engine, and I can't really afford a playset of Aramasir right now. Honestly, I can't afford a playset of Water Enchantress. But for now, I don't know if I'm going to play them just without the Adventure engine and just see how it goes, or if I want to try to play other decks that don't require as many expensive cards and see how it goes. One deck that I am eyeing, I mentioned Thunder Dragon. I'm eyeing Thunder Dragon, a build of the deck that splashes a small Chaos package, not Chaos Thunder Dragon in the same way that someone like Jesse Cotton would play, but more so just playing a few Chaos monsters like the Chaos Baby Dragons, BLS and CED, the original BLS and CED, well, the original Chaos BLS and CED, the ones that banish a light in the dark. Just as extenders that also can trigger Thunder Dragons in the graveyard. I've done a few test hands. Most of it ends on a board of IP Masquerena plus Thunder Dragon Colossus plus whatever hand traps you draw into, and a Matrix in hand to trigger the not Colossus, Titan. If only it was Colossus. If it was Colossus, the deck would be played differently, and I'd probably be splashing in Dragon Link. The locals I'll be going to is in Bay City, the stadium, and it is the sister location to the more casual stadium in Frankenmuth, the one that I went to a couple weeks ago. That one was a 4-round local. It was supposed to be a 3-round local, but at the end of round 3, 2 people were undefeated. So they had to do a 4th round to break the ties, which is fine by me because that meant I got to play more. And like I said, I played Virtual World. I'm going to do a full episode on Virtual World at some point. But just to give you kind of a taste of what that build did, it focused on ending on a board of Shen, either Zolkin if I drew something to set, or Final Sigma if I did not, and Beatrice. The Beatrice was there to send snow. I took it to 2 locals, Galaxy Buster TCG, shout out to those guys, and Frankenmuth. The Virtual World deck was pretty crazy. Normally people play Banshee and Zombie World in addition to the snow as alternate sends for Beatrice. You send the snow on your turn and then you send the Banshee on their turn, or vice versa. I found that the deck was incredibly bricky. The version that I played at Galaxy Busters did not play Gamma, even though everyone told me I should, because the driver was a brick. And I did eventually cave and throw Gamma in. Never came up, and I drew driver multiple times in my opening hand. And bear in mind, it was a 4-round local. 4 rounds, and I drew driver multiple times. So, can't say that I'm a huge fan of the Gamma package. It did nothing the entire tournament. But that deck was built to counter Sprite and Tier Limit, and by extension, a few other like Tier 2 and Tier 3 and Rogue decks. I was not prepared for the tournament that I ended up going to, which consisted of round one playing against Cosmo. Shout out to my buddy Tyler. Round two, I played against a guy who, first starting out with the game, he played a deck that was a third Charmers, the flip kind, a third Pendulums, and a third Spells and Traps that almost did nothing. I decided not to full combo the guy game two because I figured it'd be more fun for him if the game lasted a couple turns. I ended up putting myself in a pretty sticky situation where he was able to kind of, you know, keep me at bay for like 4 consecutive turns. I mean, I still won, but I will say it was fun. Round 3, I played against the Galaxy guy. Round 4, I played against a Scrap Dino guy that had no clue how the deck played, and I knew how the deck played. So I mean, I borderline coached him through game 2 when when we were done. Gave him some advice. Hope that helps him build the deck a little better in the future. Me and Galaxy guy started getting into an argument over card choice. That was fun. I digress. Yeah, we're taking Omni Hero for locals tomorrow. I recorded a deck profile like 2 days ago because I've been thinking about doing this since the weekend. Currently, it is 10:34 on Tuesday night. Tomorrow, Wednesday, I have locals at 4:30 in Bay City, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, this is going to be episode 1 of Decksploration. We are going on a bit of a spelunking journey into the depths of the Yu-Gi-Oh card pool, finding every deck that I can, playing it, seeing how it plays, and testing my ability to play a deck, my ability to build a deck, and my ability to follow through on making this video. So let's go ahead and get into the deck profile. I tried to put these in order, kind of group them by what they are or what purpose they serve. So first up, we're going to start with the Elemental Heroes. I'm playing 2 Stratos. Originally I was playing 3. Stratos is crazy, but I don't have a third Ultra, so I felt kind of weird playing mismatched rarities. My third copy would be a common. But on a more serious note, I feel as though with all of the searchability in this deck and how easy it is to get access to a search of a hero monster without using your normal summon, this card's going to be live pretty much every game. You can either search it using e-call, you can go through the Ferris line and search it off of either Ascent Shadow Mist off of Vion or using Extra Hero Cross Crusader. Access to this card is abundant, and normal summoning it as an extra body is insane. Second up is, as mentioned, Elemental Hero Shadow Mist. This card's effect to search for mask change can come in handy, especially in matchups where you know that the opponent's deck kind of crumbles under the weight of Dark Law's macro effect. The big deal about this card, though, is that with all of the search and dump effects, especially off of either Vion or Ferris, this card's pretty much always going to be used as a search. And if you're able to keep this as an extra body on board to use for mask change on your opponent's turn, it can actually get double value and search on your opponent's turn as well, which can turn into either follow-up, or it's not in this build because I'm not playing it, but it can also turn into Honest Neos, which is a card that you could theoretically play. Next up is the 1 Liquid Soldier. I was waiting for this card to get reprinted. I sold my copy for quite a bit and have just been kind of biding my time until this card got cheap again. It's still like a $10 card, but $10 is better than $80, right? There's a lot of combos that you can do with this card. The normal summon effect comes up quite a bit in order to get Shadow Mist second effect off to search for mask change, and it also can allow you to loop Stratos' search effect if you get access to it off of something like a hero lives. A hero lives, search this over the course of your combo, and then if Stratos ended up in the graveyard for some reason, you can normal summon it, bring back the Stratos, and get a second search off of it. The other effect to draw two and discard one comes up a lot more often though. Typically you search this over the course of your combo in order to try and dig for mask change, and the big advantage to that is that it doubles as both digging for mask change and also a discard outlet if you have a card that's clogging up your hand. Typically over the course of a combo you're going to get all the cards you need in the graveyard, but if you find yourself in a situation where you need that extra discard, or you just have a card in your hand that you don't want, this card's draw and discard effect can really help kind of cycle those cards out. So that's it for the elemental heroes. Like I said, I'm not playing the Honest Neos. I feel like it's just kind of not necessary, and it's a bit of a brick. Hands where you draw it, it can be discard fodder for Ferris, but at that point, I'd rather it have been, Liquid Soldier, Shadow Mist, Malicious, any number of things. But moving on to the Destiny heroes, we'll start out with Destiny hero Malicious. Pretty self-explanatory, and we'll just go ahead and throw Denier in here as well, since it's functionally the third copy of Malicious. This card's insane. The summon from graveyard effect means that it's also an extra body, and the recycling of Malicious means that it kind of turns Malicious into a 4-body monster, and this does have to take up one of your searches over the course of your combo, which means sometimes you end up with a hand where you can't get access to Liquid Soldier for any reason, and usually those are the types of hands where you either have to do a roundabout way to get access to Mask Change, you hard drew the Mask Change, or you just end on a board that doesn't include Darklaw. But the extra bodies really helps because typically over the course of a combo, if you're choosing to not search the Liquid Soldier, that search is usually dedicated to the next card, which is Destiny Hero Plasma. And the extra bodies helps make it where you can fulfill Plasma's summoning condition. This card's insane. It is a one-sided skill drain on legs, on top of the fact that it is also a pseudo relinquished, meaning that you can steal your opponent's monster as an equip. I don't know why it has that effect and a skill drain effect, but I mean, I'm not going to complain. Konami gives it to me, I'm going to use it. That's the end of the Destiny heroes, so let's go ahead and move on to the Vision heroes, starting with the boy, the man, the myth, the legend. This card single-handedly made heroes playable back when it first came out. This is basically the backbone of the entire strategy. When DPE first came out, a lot of people were playing versions of the deck that focused more on trying to get access to Verte so that you could more consistently get access to Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. In this deck, though, access to Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer is as simple as just like snapping your fingers. With so many searches, with so many extenders, and so many ways to get access to your linear combo, Vion's ability to search poly basically means that you're hard making DPE every game. And with access to Wonder Driver to recycle the polymerization, you can get access to Darklaw, DPE, and Plasma. So this card just kind of does the whole thing. And as part of the bridge, you get access to Vision Hero Increase. Ferris's effect allows you to discard a card to summon it, and when it's summoned, it sets Increase into the back row. It can set any Vision hero. On things like Master Duel, I know that I personally have had issues where I misclick and accidentally place Vion in the back row because it is a Vision hero, and Ferris doesn't say place Increase in the back row, it says place a Vision hero. But normally, over the course of a combo, Ferris is going to pitch something like a Malicious or a Shadow Mist or just any random unneeded copy of a hero monster from your hand. I have gotten into scenarios where I ended up tribute summoning the Ferris late into the game and getting the combo started that way. Uh, Putting increase in the back row, this thing tributes a hero you control, summons itself, and then when it's summoned, it summons another Vision Hero from deck, which is going to be Vision Hero Vion. The increase effect is two separate effects. The first effect is to tribute to summon itself. The second effect is to summon a Vision Hero from deck. That is usually the choke point for hero decks, is to stop that effect, either Ash it, Impermit, Veiler it, something to that effect. But in the more recent versions of the deck, the choke point doesn't really make itself apparent until usually it's too late. But it is almost always a safe bet to hit the increase if you're going to hit anything. If you only have one hand trap to interrupt, that is the place where you want to hit, because the increase represents so much advantage. It's a send off of Vion, it's a search for polymerization. I mean, it's unbelievable, especially considering the fact that it summons itself by getting rid of a hero you control, meaning that you're left with one hero. If you don't have access to an extender, or if you've already used your normal summon, a lot of times that's just a pass. Vion, on the other hand, Vion's crazy. It has two effects. The first is that when it's summoned, it Foolish Burials a monster, a hero monster specifically. Usually you're going to be using this to either send a Malicious if you haven't gotten access to it yet, or send a Shadow Mist in order to get a search. If you don't need the extra search, you can theoretically send the Shadow Mist and then reborn it later using um, Liquid Soldier. That is part of a one card Dark Law setup that is done using exclusively Fusion Destiny. But in this scenario, and in most scenarios, you're just going to be sending either Malicious or, in rare cases, Denier. Although having Denier in hand is exceptionally good, because that way you can use it as extra material for a fusion summon from hand using Poly. But you can engineer scenarios where that doesn't really matter. And that's it for the main deck hero monsters. Moving on to the hand traps. The problem that I run into is that, according to most people that I've heard talk about this format, hand traps are actually terrible this format. Things like Ash, Veiler, Ogre, Nibiru even don't do enough against the top decks, namely Sprite and Tear But the problem is that I don't have the money to buy a lot of the very powerful board breakers that would normally facilitate, you know, making hand traps obsolete. I can't afford a playset of Droplets. I can't afford a playset of Lightning Storm. But since I'm taking this deck to a local, I learned the hard way the last time I went to locals after a long time that it doesn't really matter, because most people don't have the money to be playing full power meta decks. They're usually playing low powered versions of those decks, or they're just playing complete garbage that no one has any sort of concern for when they're building their side deck. I'm trying to hedge my bets, trying to make the deck as conscious of the meta as possible, while also conscious of rogue and even table 500 stuff that I end up running into. So, in order to do so, I've kind of stuck to a very bare bones hand trap lineup, but one that makes the individual cards as impactful as possible. The Ash, I mean, it's just the most generic hand trap. It's the best hand trap in the game. I mean, it comes in and out from format to format, but it's hard to ignore the fact that it's just one of the best cards in the game. I'm just trying to have as much respect for as many decks as possible, and unfortunately, that means that, in certain matchups, this card's going to be dead. I should probably be more concerned about back row decks, but unfortunately, I don't think I have the room to main deck any sort of hate for those. You'll see in the side deck that I have things for it, but oh man. Onto the spells though. We're gonna go ahead and start with basically copies 4, 5, and 6 of any 3 of elemental hero that I may have. The thing is I don't really have any 3 of elemental heroes, but I mean you get the idea. These are copies 3, 4, and 5 of Stratos, and they're copies 3, 4, and 5 of Shadow Mist, and they're also copies 2, 3, and 4 of um, Liquid Soldier, depending on the scenario. Most of the time, I'm going to be searching for Stratos, either to normal summon it to get my play started, or to normal summon it late into the combo to try and finish things off after I've already accrued a bunch of advantage. This card is good, and I choose to play it at 3 instead of Stratos because it's just way more flexible, and it's a non once per turn card that if I draw 2 of it, I can activate both. Whereas if I draw 2 Stratos, I can't normal summon both Stratos. One of them just ends up either being fusion fodder or Ferris fodder, in which case, I mean, it would have been better served being an e-call because then I could at least convert it into a Shadow Mist instead of it just kind of being a card that doesn't replace itself like Shadow Mist would in that scenario. I play 3 Mask Change, as all good hero players should. I seriously wish I could play more of these. I've considered playing Mask Change too, but I feel like the required discard and the fact that it just has more restrictions to try and make it so that it can be splashed in other decks means that it's really bad for this deck. Normal Mask Change is just, it's technically searchable, but the hoops you have to jump through to search it are kind of crazy. Really, what you want to be doing is you want to be in a scenario where you can search for Liquid Soldier and use Liquid Soldier's draw effect to try and dig for it. If you hard open it, it's insane. And there are scenarios where you can recycle it using Wonder Driver, but you don't really want to be in that scenario. You'd rather be using Wonder Driver to recycle polymerization to be able to get both Sunrise and DPE hard made. But I mean, in certain matchups where things like Plasma don't really do anything, but Dark Law does, then you really want to be getting that double mask change. Next up is newly at 3, A Hero Lives. This card's crazy. There have been scenarios where I drew this late in the game, and over the course of my combo, I cleared my board and was able to A Hero Lives. DPE being able to pop things really just kind of elevates this card. It's really powerful. There's also been scenarios where I used it going into game 3 and it costed me the game. So as powerful as it is, the fact that it requires you to pay half your life points means that, you end up in scenarios where you just kind of lose out of nowhere. Next up, rest in peace to your boy. It's Fusion Destiny. I don't know if I would go so far as to say I want DPE banned so that we can get more copies of Fusion Destiny back. DPE is such a powerful card, and with Verte banned, not a lot of decks are playing it. I mean, at best, you end up with a striker deck that texts this in as a random card that if they draw it, they just kind of high roll their opponent. But as it is, this card's just kind of insane. It represents so much advantage. It represents a double Foolish Burial. It represents a body on board. I mean, in certain scenarios, it can end up being a +3 in advantage, a +4 in advantage over the course of an entire turn. And it is an Ash magnet. And because of the fact that some decks are playing it just to try and get access to DPE, you can kind of bluff your way into certain scenarios where you hard activate it game one into nothing, and your opponent just thinks that you're a deck that happens to play DPE and a bunch of back row, not knowing that even if they ash this card, you don't care because every card you summon from the extra deck basically is going to be a dark hero. So the restriction doesn't matter, and you end up comboing off like crazy. The restriction does matter in scenarios where you need to super poly, but those scenarios aren't going to come up very often. Next up is the one of brick Miracle Fusion. I mean, it's not really a brick. It just means that your Sunrise isn't a +1, and it can kind of clog in hands where you need this card to be a hero name of some kind. But I've found through testing that this card's kind of necessary if you want to be able to do the full nut wombo combo board of DPE, Dark Law, and Plasma. So I play it. I mean, it's probably cope, and I'll probably learn over the course of locals that it probably should be cut, but I'm going to play it because it's fun and I like it. And I have an ultra rare copy, and I mean, I want to be able to high roll people. Last minute change, we're throwing in the triple tax in place of the DD Crows. Next up, Reinforcement of the Army. This card's crazy. It represents any level 4 or lower warrior, which can be Stratos, which can be Liquid Soldier, which can be Shadow Mist, but it can also be any number of other things. It can be Vion if you need it. It can be Denier. It can be a lot of things, and most of the time it's a Stratos. But in corner cases where you need it to be something else, it can be, and that's really good, and I really like it for that fact. Yet another of the kind of bricks. This card's definitely a brick, though. You don't want to open this card. You want to be able to search it for free off of Vion, but in scenarios where you draw it, I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world. It just means that Vion's a +1 instead of a +2. But you can end up in scenarios where drawing it actually helps a lot, because if your opponent has a lot of interaction and you draw a hand that can make DPE without needing to do a lot of searching, or you draw a hand where Sunrise is easy to make early on, you can end up doing a lot of damage. Now, this kind of comes back to the whole board breakers are really good this format. Super Polymerization is a card that, a couple formats ago I probably would have said running this is a bad idea. It takes up a lot of slots in your extra deck that could have gone towards more toolboxy hero cards. But I think it's worth cutting certain cards from the extra deck in order to fit more generic super poly targets, because you want to be in a situation where you can just completely blow out your opponent and just destroy them in an instant. Because access to things like Dread Decimator and some of the more Omni Hero super poly targets, or Vision Hero Trinity, or any number of other things that a lot of other hero builds are playing, I feel like having access to cards that completely just run over other decks without needing to normal summon a hero to do it it's something that you really can't replace. And I think not running this is just hugely cope. And on top of that, it isn't just a card to break boards when you're playing against meta. This card hits rogue too. A lot of rogue decks crumble under the weight of super polymerization, and I think that that's something that you really can't ignore. Last up is a card that should probably be banned, but until then, I'm going to play it in just about every deck that I can afford to. It's called By the Grave. One of the most powerful singular spells in the game. This card represents hand trap hate, but it also represents an interruption going first if you draw it and your opponent doesn't hand trap you. This card is basically copy 4 of DD Crow going first, and it's functionally an FTK going first if your opponent tries to hand trap you and that's all they have, because this deck kind of crumbles under the weight of interaction that's well placed, and people that know the deck and know where to hand trap and can kind of sniff out when an interaction is going to end your turn. Those types of people know when to Ash, know when to Ogre, know when to DD Crow, and this card just destroys them, just sends them packing, and it can't be understated how good this card is. And now that we've gotten through that, let's go ahead and get started with the extra deck. I'm going to start with the Link monsters and move on to the Fusion monsters, because that's all we got here, because we're a Fusion deck. First up, probably the other card responsible for making heroes playable. This card, in combination with Ferris, is basically the backbone of the hero deck. This card is completely insane. It has two effects, and both of its effects are crazy. It reborns a Destiny hero, which is crazy in and of itself. Basically allows you to bring back DPE if your opponent is able to out it in a way that doesn't exactly banish it or shuffle it back. And by the way, if your opponent shuffles back your DPE, this is not a scenario where you only play two targets that you cannot recycle to summon DPE. I can absolutely just summon Denier, put the Malicious back, summon the Malicious, and make DPE a second time. It's not hard. But this card makes it where if your opponent sends DPE to the graveyard and doesn't proc the destruction effect, you can bring it back and threaten DPE again. But most of the time, you're going to be reborning something like a Malicious to tribute it off for the second effect, which allows you to search a hero monster by tributing a Destiny hero you control. This card is functionally a Destiny hero card. It's functionally a Destiny hero card in the same way that a card like the Infernal Devicer is functionally an elemental hero, because it's very clearly meant to support the old vanilla elemental heroes in the way that it searches specifically listed fusion materials. I guess it could also be an evil hero card since it's, an Infernal Devicer, but I digress. I'm getting off track. This card's crazy, and it represents one of your searches over the course of your combo. This plus Stratos plus Shadow Mist represents the three consistent searches that you get over the course of the linear combo. And this one is usually one of the first ones that you get if you didn't normal summon Stratos or send Shadow Mist off of Ferris as your first action in the combo. Next up is Extra Hero Wonder Driver. It's crazy to me that Hero has Link monsters. So many decks from this era are relegated to only having cards of one extra deck mechanic. Hero only has two. It has fusions and it has links. And I guess with the onset of Master Rule 4, Konami felt like they needed to throw non-link decks a bone and give them link monsters, even if it flew in the face of their entire philosophy. And so we end up with these extremely broken link monsters like Cross Crusader, and to a certain extent like other cards like Cherubini for Burning Abyss, or for Hauki Fibrax for Cristrons, even though that card is absolutely too generic to only be used in Cristrons, and Verte Anaconda for Predaplans. Again, too generic to only be played in Predaplans, but still, these cards are crazy. The fact that these cards require certain materials and kind of lock you into heroes using their effects is a huge example of how you balance cards like this. Cross Crusader takes warriors as its materials, but the effect to search locks you into heroes for the turn, and this card requires hero monsters as its materials, but the effects are still crazy. It has two effects, I believe. The one effect is that if it's destroyed, you can summon a dark, I think it's a dark hero. No, it's not dark. It's just any hero. If it's destroyed, you can summon a hero from hand. I think more often than not, you're using the first effect, which is if a monster is summoned to the zone it points to, you can set a fusion or polymerization spell from your grave to the field. This card allows you to recycle Fusion Destiny. It allows you to recycle Polymerization, Mask Change. Actually, let me see. I think it also says Change Quick Play. Yeah, it's a Polymerization spell, Fusion spell, or Change Quick Play spell from your grave. So it also allows you to reset Mask Change. There's also scenarios where it could let you reset Super Polymerization. I don't know why you would ever want to do that. I mean, I guess there would be scenarios where that would be a really good play, but for the most part, you're just using it to reset either polymerization or mask change in order to get a second activation out of it. And usually, in scenarios where you're setting mask change, it's usually just insurance against things like infinite impermanence, so that if your opponent imperms or tries to use some sort of targeted on field negation, you can mask change the Dark Law into another Dark Law and put them back under macro. So let's go ahead and start with the fusions. These are in less of a sensible order, mostly because I want to start with Destiny Hero Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. For starters, I pulled this when this was over $100, but kept it because I wanted to be able to play it in Heroes. And when Verte got banned, this card plummeted to being worth $40. So I'm gonna have to go talk to Konami about where that $60 is gonna come from. But it's crazy. It's insane. If there ever becomes a scenario where this card is able to be generically splashed into a bunch of decks, or if a meta deck finds a way to summon this in a way that's consistent every turn, it's going to go back to being extremely expensive. By then, though, it'll probably have a reprint, and this card will be worth like $50 instead of $100, and even then, maybe even less than that. But this card's insane in this deck. The ability to, non-targeting destroy a card your opponent controls, and the ability to recur every turn means that this card, A, is inevitable, B, gives you insane grind game, and C, gives you play against Nibiru. If your opponent Nibiru's while you have DPE on field, you can activate DPE's effect, target itself and another card you control, pop it, and at the very least you have a Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer for next turn. It's insane. It's no, Dark Law plus Plasma plus DPE, but DPE alone sometimes can just win you the game. And for that, I thank him. Next up is Sunrise. This is an Italian copy that I bought on accident because I thought it was Spanish, and I was trying to build Hero for my sister in Spanish. eBay wouldn't let me renege on the purchase, so I ended up with an Italian Sunrise that I paid like twice the retail value for. But whatever. I mean, we'll play it. We'll flex on them with the foreign. You know how it goes. This card has 3 effects. One of them is to boost everything based on the different attributes among heroes. I believe it's in Italian, so I can't check the text. I could pull my English one out of the binder, but I'm not going to. The second effect is that if a monster attacks, you can pop a card. Well, if another hero monster attacks, you can pop a card. But the third effect is what matters. When this card is summoned, you can search a Miracle Fusion, and that's literally all you're going to use it for. It has generic materials of 2 hero monsters, and that's about it. You use it kind of as a bridge. You use it to get Denier in the graveyard so that you can proc the effect later, or you use it to fusion off a Liquid Soldier in order to get the draw effect. But yeah, for the most part, it's basically just a generic Link 2, but it's a fusion, so you use polymerization. Next up is Elemental Hero Escuridao. This card is kind of twofold. It's the most generic target for Miracle Fusion. So basically, you either banish the Liquid Soldier if you were able to get into the graveyard over the course of the combo, or you banish the Stratos, which you most certainly got access to over the course of the combo, or in very niche scenarios, you can banish the Shadow Mist, and then you just banish a Dark. any dark, you end up with a bunch of darks over the course of the combo. But you use that with Miracle Fusion, and this basically becomes a free body that you get access to that you can tribute for the summoning condition of Plasma. Next up is Destiny Hero Dangerous. This card is probably very cuttable in certain scenarios, but this basically turns Fusion Destiny into a rota for the archetype because it allows you to send the Shadow Mist in order to search a hero. So you can send Malicious Shadow Mist, and you can get access to Malicious, and you get a search, and you get the body. So this card's definitely good in that scenario. But for the most part, this card just kind of rots in your extra deck. It can also be a super polymerization target if you have access to a Destiny Hero and super polymerization and you need to get rid of a problematic dark monster on your opponent's side of the field. Normal summon Denier, activate super poly, go into this. Can be a pretty powerful play, but most of the time, if you have super polymerization, hopefully your opponent built their board in such a way that you can use one of your other more generic super polymerization targets. So we play 2 Dark Law. This card has 2 effects, both of which are insane. It has a Delinquent Duo effect when your opponent adds, but it's a single Delinquent Duo and it's random, so it's not as powerful as Delinquent Duo in that regard. But it's still crazy. If your opponent draws, if your opponent adds from deck to hand, this card allows you to just randomly banish a card from their hand. And in some scenarios, you end up banishing the card that they added, and they get really upset. But on top of that, it's also a macrocosmos, but one-sided. Every card your opponent would send to the graveyard gets banished instead. This, in combination with Plasma, makes 2 hero cards that just for some reason have 2 incredibly powerful effects tacked onto each other that seem to have nothing to do with each other. This one, at the very least, has the ability of banishing a card from your opponent's hand, which kind of goes in tandem with the whole banish motif. But for the most part, this card just kind of sits on the field as a macro, and you just kind of protect it at all costs. We play 1 Anki. This card is only here because it's a secondary mask change target for Dark, and it allows you to search another mask change. So you can theoretically attack into something, search a mask change it out for a Dark Law, and attack into something else. And this card basically just kind of becomes just kind of a board clearing, but also allows you to end on Floodgate. So, I mean, it is pretty good, but it hardly ever comes up. It can also be used in time scenarios where you can summon it and attack your opponent directly for half damage. And, I mean, that can kind of usually be the difference between winning or losing a game. So, this card's important to keep in the extra deck, but it could theoretically be replaced with something else. Mask Hero Blast is here exclusively to make it where mask change becomes called by the grave copies 2, 3, and 4 in very, very specific scenarios. If your opponent tries to Imperm or Veiler your Stratos and you have a mask change in hand, you can mask change it out into this, and the effect still resolves since Stratos wasn't on field to be targeted and negated. On top of that, it can also be used to pop back row, so it can be used to out problematic floodgates. But, I mean, if you're dealing with a problematic floodgate, odds are you can't really get into this anyway. Then we have the generic non-hero super poly targets. That's right. My Starving Venom is foreign. I think it's Spanish, but I can't tell from here, and I don't feel like picking it up to check. But these cards are just the most generic ones that I have access to. I'd love to get the new one, but I don't think I can get it in time for the local. And it's also a secret rare from the most recent set, so it probably is out of my price range. but all of these cards just represent breaking boards using super polymerization. And then there's Entis. Nothing in the deck really facilitates needing this card. The only reason I keep it in here is in the off chance that my opponent plays Maximus or some other card that forces me to send a card from my extra deck to the graveyard. It's exclusively just here as insurance in case somebody's playing Dogmatica. And in those scenarios, it's just crazy. It's insane. But I mean, it could be cut for something else. There's other cards that I seriously considered playing that this card could have been, but like I said before, I want to hedge my bets. I don't know what people are going to be playing at this local. Now let's do a quick run through of the side deck. So I'm playing evenly matched. I hear this card's really good this format, and it's the only good board breaker that I have that actually removes threats from the field. Next up is Dark Ruler No More. This is also a board breaker, but it doesn't remove anything from the field. Requires me to use my battle phase to out things, but I don't get to do any damage. It's still crazy and still breaks through boards like butter. Next up is Nibiru because I want to respect Rogue. I know this card is not very good against meta decks right now, but if I play against another Rogue deck, this card coming in it's going to blow them out of the water. Next up is Appointer. This card is exclusively for meta, mostly Sprite, to try and side it in to snipe something really good. But I could theoretically side it in going first against any deck, and it would be insane just to be able to take a look at their hand and pull something from it. And last up is 3 Cosmic Cyclone. Mine is like super prevalent right now, and I imagine some people will be playing decks that are just Mine Turbo. Whether it's Mine Burn or something similar to that Altergeist deck that topped the European Nationals. I want to respect back row, but I don't want to respect it enough to dedicate more than 3 slots. And I definitely don't want to have to discard a card. And I think in scenarios where I'm playing against Mind Burn, this card's better than Twin Twisters because if they have access to something like Field Barrier, this card gets around it, or if they have access to some other type of destruction protection, Cosmic Cyclone just kind of Dougies all over them. And that's it for the deck profile.
I had to pop over to the gas station to go to the bathroom. Just finished round 1. Dude beat me with 13 minutes left. Easy 2-0 for him. He was playing Sprite. Just insane player. And I bricked game 1. Drew 2 Mask Change, Super Polymerization, Ash, and Plasma. Just couldn't play that. Game 2 I opened playable, but when I went to Appointer him and look at his hand was insane. There was no way I was going to play through it. He had 2 Dark Ruler No More, Swap Frog, Ronin, and some other card, and I couldn't do it. I tried to Appointer away the swap, but it wasn't enough. Even through DPE, Sunrise, and a Mali, which turned into a Dark Law. The Dark Law kind of messed him up. Bought me a couple turns, but I mean, he made the mistake of stealing my DPE and then popping itself, allowing me to get it back, but it ended up not mattering. We'll see how game 2 goes. Just won round 2 against Cyberdark. He was playing an extremely scuffed build that kind of ran some weird burn cards and the Malefic cards. I went second game 1 and OTK'd him using Mask Change. I went first game 2, ended on DPE, Dark Law, Plasma, the normal full combo. I ended up not using the Mask Change on his turn because he just normal summoned Keel and set 3 activated Wave Motion Cannon, games 1 and 2. Game 2, since he had the 6th card, he had a discard for the set Super Polymerization, which he had set both games for some reason. But I sniped it with DPE in his end phase. And I don't even know if he plays any good targets. He had like a 7-card extra deck. But hopefully I get paired up with a real deck next round. I think there's 2 more rounds, maybe 3, depending on how ties happen. Thinking I might eat some food before, yeah, because it's almost 6 o'clock. Yeah, I think I might eat some food before I head back in there.
Cannot be the end of the next round.
Well, I went over.
Set one.
All right, tournament over. 4th round finished. Probably, I don't know, 20 minutes ago. I wasn't able to record a recap directly after round 3 because round 3 went into time. Yay! I was playing against a suboptimal branded Despia Lair deck. He used Lair of Darkness and a lot of the Lady of Lament cards and the Lair adjacent cards that tribute a monster. He kind of put me, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Game 1, I believe I won the dice roll. I go first. I end on a board of, I believe, just Dark Law, but I used Wonder Driver to reset the mask change so that I could get a second activation. Because I knew from observing the other rounds that he was playing branded, so I figured he couldn't really play through Dark Law. I was correct. He ended up using the layer cards to tribute off my Dark Law, which was a little annoying. If I had summoned the Malicious from Grave, I could have still had Dark Law, but Ash on his branded fusions still was enough. He wasn't able to play through it, and over the course of 2 or 3 turns, I ended up called by the Graving his target for branded in red. It was pretty telegraphed. He searched the branded in red, and I asked, that target's engraved for cost, correct? And he goes, I swear if you called by me, I'm going to lose it. Apparently, the previous round, he had also lost to called by his branded in red target. So he was pretty salty about that. Game 2, I'm going second, and we get into this really long grind game where I'm basically just summoning DPE back every turn. I forget to activate the DPE at one point, but I'm able to bring it back with Cross Crusader and continue the chain. He ended up beating me over the course of the game. I think life points were he was at 54, I was at like 78 or something like that, and I top decked a Hero Lives on an open board. I think he had Queritus, or something like that. I mean, the question became, do I activate a Hero Lives knowing that time is about to be called in like 3 minutes? Or do I set the Ash in my hand and hope that he can't summon something larger than Ash's butt? Turns out he had Branded Fusion in hand, and he was able to summon something. He declares battle phase with 5 seconds left in the round and ends up being able to clear my board and attack me for game. In game 2, we're in game 2, and this local does not allow for ties. So we end up going into overtime. We get 3 turns. I get to start, so I'm turn 0, 1, 2, 3. I get to start. I set up a board of, I set up the full board. I set up DPE, Plasma, and Dark Law, and he can't play through it. I mean, he does the best he can to play through the board. I mean, it's a lot. He ends up being able to he I believe he hard opens the branded fusion, but I drew Ash, so I'm just built different, I guess. I Ash his branded fusion, and at that point he doesn't really have a lot he can do because he's under plasma. He sets a monster and sets a card and passes over to me. I realize after about 6 minutes of deliberation as to how I'm going to deal with this, I realize that plasma can suck up face down. So I plasma take his face down, which was a Springin's kit, I believe, and just take the game. Round 4 was against Sky Striker. It was a pretty quick 2-0, which is crazy because some of the other games that people were telling me they had against the Sky Striker guy, game 1 lasted 35 minutes. So I was pretty happy when I look at my hand of full combo plus tactics, and he Valor's my Stratos, allowing me to tactics look at his hand. He has an Ash. I have a Fusion Destiny. I take the Ash, activate Fusion Destiny. Basically combo off from there. I have to play through a Valor at that point. But I forget to add Poly off of Vion. It completely scuffs the entire line. I went through the entire line, sent Malicious, I sent Denier, I sent Liquid Soldier. I was prepared to draw 2, discard 1 on top of the full combo. And because I forgot to add the Poly, I ended on Dangerous Pass. Game 1 took 20 minutes, and it was all because I forgot to add the Poly. And at that point, now I'm just fumbling my way through the game, trying to figure out a way, because I decide to add Vion off of Reinforcements of the Army turn 3, normal summon it just to get the Poly so I can get my plays going, summon DPE, and it's basically just DPE control at that point. I'm popping I'm popping my normal summon just to get rid of his back row. For some reason he decided to set a known Widow Anchor instead of Widow Anchoring my DPE. I don't know why he did that. Probably because he couldn't take it, and Widow Anchoring it for the turn doesn't really do anything. He probably should have just kept it in hand. I ended up DPEing it away in the end phase. I mean, eventually I'm able to kill him. Game 2, I don't get to look at his hand, but I basically get to know the entire contents. He, for some reason, he activates Area 0, sets a card, Area 0's into a, I believe, not Afterburners, but the one that pops spells. I can't remember what it's called. He goes into that. The card he set was multi-roll. I'm like, who sends multi-roll off of Area 0? I was blown away. I mean, he basically threw the game for me. I mean, the plays that he was making, I mean, he didn't draw super well game 1. He drew a lot of hand traps, but he didn't draw into any of his engine that helps him snowball. But game 2, man, he misplayed hard. And I ended up taking it because, he decides to go second, so I'm able to start. I decided not to do, too much. I sided out of a couple things that I thought weren't good against his deck. I sided out the super polymerizations I was main decking. But for some reason, I couldn't side out the Nibiru's because I didn't have enough stuff to bring it in. I should have known that he was going to go second. I should have sided for that. I went first. So, he Valor's my Stratos, and I ended up having to pass because I didn't have. I had Stratos and Ferris, but I didn't have a way to get to a discard for Ferris. So Ash on the Stratos was not Ash. Valor on the Stratos was correct, and it caused me to just pass turn. From that point on, I just grinded him out. I didn't really draw into anything good, and I didn't really feel like tribute summoning the Ferris. So I think what I ended up doing was I did like a limited version of the line. I didn't end on a ton of stuff. I basically just went as much of the combo as I could in order to kill him, and it took a couple turns because I just kept not drawing anything. But I ended up with DPE and Cross Crusader, and the DPE was reducing his attack by a lot because I had put a bunch of heroes in the grave. So the Shizuku attack reduction didn't matter. So it was only like 300 or 400. All in all, I went 3-1, and the only person I lost to came in second because their only loss was to the person who was undefeated. I ended up getting third or fourth, depending on how I got top 4 out of, I think, 11 or something like that, which is not terrible. I mean, it's a small local, so you can't really, hold people to too high of a standard. And a couple of my rounds were kind of free. Round 2 against the Cyberdart guy was extremely free, and round 4 against the Striker guy, I mean, if he had drawn better, if he had like drawn mine going second, I might have been in a bit of an issue. I might have just scooped immediately game 2. But it is what it is. I feel like the deck did really well. I feel like I did really well. That's the end for episode 1 of Decksploration. We have now finished with Hero. I am more than willing to revisit it in the future, but not for a while. Next episode, I'll have to think about what I want to play. I have a few decks built. The problem is that I can't really build them optimally, so it's going to be a struggle, but I will see you in the next one.